You wake up with a fever, your body aches, your throat is on fire, and you can barely stand. So you do what you have always done. You reach for a small bottle of pills, you swallow 2, and within an hour the pain begins to fade. Now imagine that bottle does not exist. Imagine nothing like it has ever existed, not anywhere, not for anyone, in the entire history of your species. That was the world every single one of your ancestors lived in for 300,000 years. So what did they actually do when they got sick? When the fever came, when the wound turned green, when a child stopped breathing in the night? The answer is stranger, more brutal, and in some ways more brilliant than you would ever guess. Because long before we had medicine, we were already trying to heal. Let's start with the hardest truth. For most of human history, getting sick was a coin flip with death. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no understanding of germs. A simple infected cut, the kind you would not even think about today, could kill you in a week. A bad tooth could turn into an infection that spread to your blood and ended your life. Childbirth killed mothers at rates that are almost impossible to imagine now. And of every 10 children born into a hunter-gatherer camp, roughly 4 would die before they reached the age of 5. Death was not a distant event. It lived in the camp with you, always close. But here is what is remarkable. Your ancestors did not simply lie down and accept it. The instinct to heal, to fight back against sickness, is almost as old as humanity itself. And the evidence is written in the bones. Archaeologists have found ancient skeletons with terrible injuries, broken legs, shattered arms, that had clearly healed. And this is more meaningful than it sounds. A broken leg in the wild is a death sentence for most animals because you cannot walk, you cannot find food, you cannot run from predators. For one of these injuries to heal, it means someone else fed that person. Someone protected them. Someone carried them and waited for weeks or months while the bone knit back together. The anthropologist Margaret Mead is said to have called a healed thigh bone the first sign of civilization because it is proof that somebody stopped to help instead of leaving the weak behind. Care for the sick may be one of the oldest human acts there is. So how did they treat illness? The first medicine cabinet was the natural world itself, and your ancestors knew it with a depth we have almost completely lost. Through thousands of years of trial, error, and watching what worked, they built up an enormous library of plant knowledge. They knew which leaves slowed bleeding, which barks brought down fever, which roots settled a sick stomach, and which berries would kill you. This was not magic. A lot of it was real. Working chemistry, consider this. Willow bark was chewed by people across the ancient world to ease pain and fever. We now know willow bark contains a compound closely related to the active ingredient in aspirin. They had no idea about the chemistry. They only knew that it worked. The same is true of countless other remedies. Many of the medicines in your pharmacy today are refined versions of plants that ancient healers were using thousands of years ago. And there is harder evidence than the camps of modern hunter-gatherers. Even species before us seem to have used medicine. Scientists studying the remains of a Neanderthal, one of our close human relatives, found traces in the dental plaque of an individual who was sick. Inside that ancient plaque were chemical signatures of a plant we use for pain, and even of a natural mold related to penicillin. A sick Neanderthal, tens of thousands of years ago, may have been dosing himself with a painkiller and an early antibiotic, scraped from the world around him. The urge to medicine ourselves runs deeper than our own species. Then there is surgery, and this is where it gets genuinely shocking. One of the oldest operations in human history is something called trepanation. It involves drilling or scraping a hole directly through the living skull, into the head of a conscious or barely conscious person. And it was done all over the world by cultures that never met, going back many thousands of years. Here is the part that stuns people. The skulls survived. Archaeologists have found ancient trepan skulls where the bone around the hole had healed and grown back, which means the patient did not die on the spot. They lived, sometimes for years afterward. Some skulls show multiple holes, healed at different times, meaning the same person survived the procedure again and again. We do not fully know why they did it, perhaps to relieve pressure from a head injury, perhaps to release what they believed were evil spirits causing seizures or madness. But the survival rate, achieved with sharpened stone and no anesthetic, is almost unbelievable. Now we have to talk about the part of ancient healing that was not chemistry, but belief. Because to your ancestors, sickness was not random bad luck or invisible germs. It had meaning. Illness was thought to come from broken taboos, from angry spirits, from curses, or from a soul that had wandered out of the body. And so the person you went to when you got sick was not just a herbalist, they were a healer of the spirit. We often call them shamans. It is easy to dismiss this as superstition, but do not be so quick. The shaman did something powerful that we are only now fully respecting in modern medicine. They gave the sick person a story, a reason, and above all, hope. They performed rituals, chanted, laid on hands, gathered the whole community around the suffering person in a wave of attention and care. And we now know through hard science that belief itself can change the body. The placebo effect, the measurable healing that comes purely from expecting to get better, is real and strong. When a trusted healer told a frightened, feverish person that they would be well, and the entire camp believed it with them, that belief could genuinely tilt the body toward recovery. The shaman was, in a sense, prescribing hope. And hope heals more than we like to admit. There was also something your ancestors had that we have largely lost. They were almost never sick alone. There was no isolation, no lying by yourself in a quiet room scrolling on a screen. When you fell ill, the group closed around you. People brought you water and chewed food soft for you. They kept you warm, kept the fire fed, sat with you through the night. Loneliness, which we now know is itself terrible for the sick body, was simply not part of being ill. You suffered, but you suffered surrounded. Of course, none of this should be romanticized. We have to be honest about the trade. For all their plant knowledge and all their care, your ancestors lived at the mercy of disease in a way that would terrify us. They could not stop an infection once it took hold in the blood. They watched children burn with fevers they could not break. They lost mothers in childbirth, again and again. The average life was shadowed by a closeness to death that we, in our world of vaccines and antibiotics, can barely comprehend. This is the trade nobody talks about when they romanticize the past. We gained an almost miraculous power over sickness. We just gave up something else to get it, because here is what is worth sitting with. We won the war against the infections that used to kill us. But somewhere along the way, we also made being sick a lonelier thing. We pulled it out of the circle of the community and into private rooms and waiting halls. Your ancestors had no cure for the fever, but they had something we keep forgetting we need. They had each other, pressed close, refusing to let the sick face it alone. So the next time you swallow a pill and feel the ache melt away in an hour, remember how astonishing that actually is. Remember the willow bark, the drilled skulls, the healed thigh bones, the shamans chanting hope into the dark. For 300,000 years, your ancestors fought sickness with stone tools. Plant wisdom, belief, and the warmth of the people around them. They lost that fight far more often than they won it. You are alive today because they kept fighting it anyway. Every remedy they discovered, every wound they nursed, every sick child they refused to abandon, is part of an unbroken chain of human care that runs all the way down to the bottle of pills in your hand. They could not save themselves, but they kept each other alive long enough to pass the torch. And eventually, that torch became us.